Hello and welcome. You're watching Glitterati on News Central Television, the space where powerful stories meet powerful minds. And I'm your host, Judith Atibi. And here we celebrate the written word, not just as entertainment, but as a force for reflection, resistance, and transformation. Each episode, we dive into books that don't just leave on the page, but they spark something in us: curiosity, courage, or compassion. And today's story is no exception. We are stepping into the world of The Parlour Wife, a moving, masterfully written debut novel. It is set in 1940s colonial Lagos against the backdrop of World War II, and follows Kehinde, a young woman with dreams bigger than the world she's been handed. At just 18, Kehinde aspires to be a writer, but when duty, tradition, and history collide, she finds herself becoming the third wife of a wealthy businessman. This is a story of resilience, reclamation, and the quiet power of women who refuse to be forgotten, even when the world tries to erase them. Now, let's meet the mind behind The Parlour Wife. My guest today is the author, Foluso Agbaje. Foluso Agbaje has been writing stories since she first learned to write. She loves London but calls Lagos home, and her stories are shaped by these cities that have captured her heart. When not coiled up with her Kindle, you'll find her in a bookshop, a museum, or at a restaurant. She's a big fan of period dramas and has watched every episode of Downton Abbey more times than she's willing to admit. After graduating from the Faber Academy in 2022, Foluso debuted or completed her debut novel, The Parlour Wife. She has a master's degree in management and human resources from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's degree in accounting from Loughborough University. A storyteller at heart, Foluso is always drawn to narratives that explore identity, culture, and resilience. She continues to write, inspired by the complexities of the human experience. And without further ado, please welcome my guest, Foluso Agbaje. Foluso, congratulations and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I must say that when I picked up the book and I found that it was a period piece, I was like, whoo. For a debut, that is quite a heavy feat. And so let me just start. Let's start with what inspired you to write The Parlour Wife?
That's a question I get asked quite often. I think, lots of people find out that it's a debut novel and like you, they're surprised that it's a period piece. So, what inspired it was I really enjoy period dramas. I really enjoy reading period novels. And I realized that despite all the World War II novels I had read, I hadn't read much about Nigeria during that time period. And Nigeria was a colony of the British Empire at that time. So I knew that, obviously Nigeria would have been involved in the war in some shape or form. And I started asking my grandparents questions. So, thankfully, and I'm very grateful to still have all my grandparents still alive.
Lucky you.
Very, very lucky. I don't take it for granted. And they were quite instrumental in my research. So I started talking to them about the war. The oldest two were children during the Second World War in Lagos, Nigeria, and they lived in Lagos Island. So I started asking them questions, and I realized there was so much that happened in that time, and there was so much, meat to be able to write a novel out of. And that's when Kehinde's story really started for me.
And how much of your own experience found its way into Kehinde's world?
Tricky question. Kehinde is a woman in 1940s Lagos, and while she is a completely fictional character, I drew on some of the experiences that I've had in my life and some of the experiences that many women I know have also had. So that resilience in the face of being told no so many times is something that I've experienced. It's something that I know many women face every single day. That resilience when you might be in a situation, a relationship that doesn't, promote your ideals or what you want, having the resilience to keep pushing past that. And I also really wanted to write a story about women's empowerment in the sense that, we're all trying to live a life that's full of self-fulfillment, but you can't be fulfilled without being empowered. Kehinde had to empower herself to live the kind of life that she wanted to live and the kind of life that she was proud of. And I really wanted to write a story like that would resonate with women throughout the ages.
And that it did. Now we're going to get into Kehinde, which is a very layered character. At 18, the things that she had to deal with. We're going to deal with that, but let's talk about the novel. It's set in such a charged period, and you can feel it just from the first page. The first page of the book, is already set in the tone of what's to come, the anticipation of grief or of sense of foreboding in the air, and especially colonial Lagos during World War II, 1940s. What was your process for bringing that time to life? I think it's different from, hearing oral history from our parents, but there's so much more when it comes to world building or going back in time and trying to stay true to that. So what were the truths that you found in trying to uncover the research for this book?
So my research process was very structured because I wanted to write a historical fiction novel that didn't read like a history textbook. But I still wanted it to be as...
Can there be a balance? No, wait, hang on. Let's pause. Pause that for a second. Because there's some books that you pick up, right? And immediately it's like, Madam, I'm not saying that I'm not here for world building. World building can actually break or mar a book, right? It can make or break a book. But there are times where it just tips over the edge. So how are you able to even balance that?
It's a very tough one, and it's a very thin line. But what I found helpful was really leaning into the human experience at that time. So thinking, obviously the people at that time had their own goals, and yes, they were in the middle of a war, but they still wanted what they wanted in their life.
Right.
It's the way we are now. Like, we've all lived during a pandemic.
Right.
But when you think about your life during the pandemic, you're not thinking, oh, wow, it was a global pandemic. You're thinking, I had to work from home instead of going into the office. My children had to learn school online. I couldn't buy groceries as easily as I used to before the pandemic. So I used that to kind of frame the research, where I had the research, but I also really tried to stick with the story I had and padded the story with, the facts, but also really just tried to stick with what were women in 1940s Lagos experiencing at that time, and, really making it human. Because at the end of the day, as an author, your job is to capture a human experience on paper. You really want to, it's such a beautiful profession to be doing, a beautiful job to be doing, because you look at somebody and you're thinking, what is it about that person that made them smile the way they smiled? Or what is it about that person that made them walk the way they did? And trying to capture that on paper can be so challenging, but it's so rewarding when you're able to do that. So with the research, I started writing the book in 2019, and I had my grandparents' first-hand accounts, but I also did a lot of research online and at the British Library. So I was spending a lot of time in London between 2019 and when I finished the book in 2022. And I would just, I signed up to be a member of the British Library, and they have so much data.
And they're the colonizers, they ought to. Sorry. Keep going.
That is a good point, but they have so many accounts. There were some really interesting books I read, and I put the references at the back of the book. So many interesting accounts where I read about colonial masters' wives and the experience they had in Nigeria, or colonial administrators and, what they were doing at the time. Even just history, like what was happening with the Lagos Market Women's Association. Online, there's also so much information online. Like on YouTube, I had access to documentaries. On Netflix, there's a documentary that really stood out, and it was the one by Mr. Shupo Shashere. I think it's called There Was a Country.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yes. I think it's also a book as well. That's now titled
The Journey of an African Colony. I think that's what it's called.
Right.
But it was really good. And I had a few of his books as well that I was able to access. So I had to pull all of that together with my grandparents' accounts and, the story I had. It's like having a skeleton and then you're getting blood from here, you're getting flesh from there, and then just trying to make sure that it's all kind of coming together.
Yeah, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Yeah, I get it.
That sounds very sinister, but
I know. I'm sorry. Look, Candace's journey also, as you said earlier during your earlier submission, you were saying that you also wanted a story that was about women's empowerment and liberation in some sense. And that's what we see with Kandace's journey. What started out as somebody who wanted to write and, contribute and, really document, so to speak, and tell stories or let people see the world from our eyes through her pen. It slowly metamorphosed to her joining into activism through, the Lagos Market Women's Association, and clearly that's where we get the Parlour Wife from. But at the risk of giving away this book, it's such a powerful pivot in this novel. How did you want this to speak to Nigeria's legacy of, was it part of your goal to talk about Nigeria's women's legacy of activism and female resistance, especially to the colonial masters?
Yes and no. So, I know you've touched on the title of the book, and I'll start with that part of the answer. So, I initially wanted to write a book because my grandpa of the Parlour Wife, because my grandpa was telling me a story about his uncle in 1940s Nigeria, who he went to visit, and this uncle was already married, but apparently had a new wife. And he said, this wife is Iyawo Parlour. Nobody should disturb her. She's not cooking, she's not cleaning, she's not here for all of that. She's just here to receive my visitors
and entertain them.
Look pretty and entertain them. And I remember, so for anyone who's not Yoruba and listening, Iyawo is wife. So Iyawo Parlour, wife, Parlour Wife, the wife of the Parlour. And I remember thinking, when he told me this, I wonder what, how she felt about being Iyawo Parlour. Did she know that's what she was getting into?
Right.
Did she want to be doing that? And I really wanted to write a story from that perspective in that time. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, when I started doing the research about that time, before I did the research, I didn't really know much about the Lagos Market Women's Association. And it was when I was uncovering the research, I was like, wow, this happened. Nobody talks about this that much. But we see how the women in Nigeria were fighting for essentially Nigeria's rights as a colony of the British Empire. Because, again, we don't talk about this, but the contribution that Nigeria made to the Second World War in terms of resources,
astounding.
It was just, it was a lot.
And blood.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I think in lots of the time, with history, we almost, there are a lot of forgotten voices that we don't talk about that, kind of shape the way a country goes. And I really wanted to touch on the forgotten voices in this period of Nigeria's history, which was the market women who stood up for, at the risk of not dropping any spoilers, who stood up for the rights of, not just themselves, but other women in Nigeria.
Right.
And ensured that Nigeria was not being exploited during the Second World War.
Right. And it makes us wonder about just our legacy itself as women. In writing this and just uncovering how much was contributed by the women, and how that has just slowly been swept under the carpet or just lost in the pages of books of history. It begs to wonder about, our legacy as well, or the legacy of the women before us and the role of women in the Nigerian narrative. Do you think that you have been able to fulfill that in some sense, to bring it to fore with this, your book?
Oof, I think it's a heavy task to do.
I know.
Because I think, in our history, we've had so many formidable women, so many women who have contributed massively, not just to Nigeria's history, but Africa and the world. So I think it's impossible. This is not a humble brag. I think it's impossible to do that in one book. But I do think that, I've been able to bring it to the fore in the sense that people are talking. And if it sparks, somebody else's idea of wondering what their own grandparents were doing at that time, or what other woman that contributed to history was doing. It's completely fictional, but I do like that it started the conversation about what was happening in that time and how women have contributed to Nigeria's history.
Yeah, and I'm glad it is too, because look, the women in my life, we're going to get into that. But first, let's go on a short break. If you're just tuning in and watching Literati here on New Central Television, my guest today is Foluso Agbaje. She's the author of the debut, The Parlour Wife. When we come back after the break, we're going to be talking about the journey that Kehinde had to go through, writing, influence, and so much more. But first, let's go on that short break. Stay with us.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at New Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
Kennedy. Welcome back. You're watching Literati on News Central Television. I'm still here with the brilliant Foluso Agbaje, author of The Parlour Wife, a novel that is both a powerful historical portrait and a deeply intimate look at womanhood, tradition, and quiet rebellion. Now, before the break, we were talking about a writing process, influence, and everything else in between. But now, let's go and talk about, your process or the journey. This is look, I still don't, when I picked it up, I said, because normally people would want to start with a collection of short stories, they want to do like contemporary, how do you call it, women's fiction, women literature, they want to do that, but history, so I'm sure that the journey was long, right? So talk to me. Every novel has its journey. What was your journey? What was your writing process like for this book? Was there any surprises, any setbacks or light bulb moments along the way? And were there times where the story was metamorphosing before your eyes?
Yes.
And you just I'm just going to go with it and see the end?
Yes, definitely. So when I initially started writing the book, it was called Parlour Wives because it was supposed to be, at least in my head, I had planned for it to be a dual perspective novel between two of the characters. So Kende, who's the protagonist, and Ayo, who is the second wife in the house. So I had so many chapters I had written already from Ayo's perspective. And as I started writing the book, I just realized I had so much I wanted to do with Kende's character that it would have been,
And you did, it's okay. It's okay.
It would have been 3 times the size of this book if I had done Ayo's perspective as well. And, who knows, maybe there's a book there one day, but sadly, I had to put Ayo down, and Ayo is one of my favorite characters in this book, and, I had to put in lots of her chapters down and focus on Kennedy's story. And, that's linked to the process of writing the book. So I mentioned that I started writing it in 2019, and I had interviews with my grandparents, and I also did research online and, physically in libraries. But a big part of the process was also just trying to sculpt the plot. The Lagos Market Women's Association was all new from my research. That was not even something I had on my radar. It was all completely like, wow, I have to talk about this because this was so prominent at the time. Also, in terms of just, writing historical fiction, like you said, it's very hard. It's extremely hard. And I think because everyone experiences history in different ways, it's a huge responsibility to be able to, try and capture that in your own words in a way that is, mostly true, but at the same time, it's still fiction. So you're still wanting to write a story that resonates with the messages you're trying to send across. So it was hard. I think there were moments when, just trying to imagine what happened at that time, like visually see it. I walked around Lagos Island so many times, just trying to reconstruct scenes in my head. Because Lagos Island today looks very different from what it looked like in 1940s.
Right, yeah.
Yes. And my grandparents lived there, so they'd be talking about some scenes, and I would think, I can't write it like that because it's so different now. But there were also some scenes that, they were so helpful with. So, for example, the scene where the war was announced.
When people were packing up their bags.
My grandpa remembers that so vividly that I almost wrote it verbatim, as he remembered it, with the cannons blasting and how he had to leave school because he was in school that day, how they closed school early, and just the way the adults were so tense. So that was helpful, but it was definitely it was a tough process. I had to be very structured in my time. I usually write in the mornings. I find that's when my brain works best. And I think, especially writing historical fiction where you're reconstructing whole scenes from, other people's memories, I had to be very disciplined with the process, and I had to, stick with my timeline.
How did language play in all of that as well? And by language, I mean, the spoken language and syntax, because it's metamorphoses with every, I mean, now it's, don't get me started. Don't get me started on the new way we speak, the contemporary language or how we speak now. How was that like, factoring that into your writing?
It's interesting you ask, actually, because with the language, I tried to keep it in between periods. So the language in the book is not, strictly how people in 1940s Nigeria were speaking. Because again, I was trying to make it relatable to people today. But there were a few maybe phrases, the way people would talk to each other. Like, now if I introduce myself to you, I'll just say, my name is Foluso. I won't necessarily say, hello, my name is Foluso Agbaje. It's almost, a lot of people do that still, but it's not, with younger people, it's not commonplace to introduce your full name. Whereas, in Kende's time, she would always introduce herself with her full name.
Yeah.
The way people spoke was different. But like I said, I tried to keep it in between periods so that it's a bit more relatable.
The storytelling, you navigate all kinds of themes. So there's culture, there's class, there's gender to generations as well. And the novel, beautifully weaves in how societal expectations can just shape one's journey or life, whether it is suppression or in this case of Kennedy's spark rebellion. But how were you able to navigate these tensions in this dichotomy of a gender, generation, class, culture, chaos, resilience, in all of that to tell the story?
That was something that was very tricky to do.
I know.
In terms of how I was able to navigate it, I kept asking myself, what does Kennedy want? Like, what is Kennedy's end goal? What is she trying to do? And that was what really just anchored the story. There's no human being that only has one conflict. You're usually juggling different things. So in Kennedy's case, she didn't want to get married. She had a job she wanted to do that she didn't, she wasn't able to do. She had her twin brother, who was the person she was closest to, go off to fight for the war. Like you rightly put it, back then, Kennedy was struggling with, she didn't want to get married, but she had to get married. Yeah. I think it's quite similar now. Like, thankfully, we are able to do the kind of jobs we want to do.
Right.
But there are many women that will tell you that, people didn't celebrate their new job the way they celebrated their marriage. Or they got married and then people were asking, so when is the baby coming? Like, it's almost as if, as a woman, society always expects you to do something else or something more. And if you're not, sure about what you're trying to do, it's very easy to get sidetracked and think, okay, this is what society expects of me. Maybe I'm not the kind of person I want to be. Whereas, like Kennedy had to do, she had to keep remembering, what do I want for my life? And how do I actually achieve that despite what society is pushing me to do?
And it's very easy to sink into despair, so to speak, especially in that situation. You can very much just sink into despair and just accept what is status quo and just be like, that's your life. So you do that really well. Well, we're almost out of time, but I cannot let you go because you're on that chair. And anybody who sits on this chair gets to play a game show.
Oh,
it's called the Humor Judith Game Show. Drum roll. So what we do is I ask you rapid fire questions, and you have to answer quickly, like with the speed of lightning.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, no speed of light. You gotta move. Earlier, you told us you're an early bird when it comes to writing.
Yes.
So we have that in the back. So that means tea or coffee?
Tea. Green tea, specifically.
I know you're in London. You're partly
No,
London.
I don't like coffee at all. Like,
why don't you like coffee?
Oh gosh, I think my palate is probably not evolved enough to be to want.
What are you, 24?
I think my palate is probably like a 10-year-old. I have a very sweet tooth, so coffee just doesn't do it for me at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any guilty pleasure reads or genres?
Oof.
Historical books, I guess.
Well, not historical books. I love historical fiction, but I think I've recently become a big fan of rom-coms. I feel like they're just so.
So is that
sweet.
what you're working on next?
Good question. So my next novel is probably a bit of everything. It's a family drama, specifically.
Oh, I love those.
It's specifically a family drama. But there's a lot of romance. There is a lot of romance in there as well.
Family drama, I am sat. You know what I mean? Like,
it's family drama. It's contemporary, so it's post-COVID Nigeria.
Oh, I love it.
Perspectives.
I love. Girl, you got me. Send me a copy immediately.
I will.
Send me an arc. What are you doing? If you could have dinner with any author, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, I think Wole Soyinka.
Yeah, I can get you him. Who else?
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, we are highly connected.
Who else?
What's one thing people don't know about you?
Oh, I think I've given this away that I've got a really sweet tooth. Like,
yeah, I didn't know that. You just said
I mentioned my lack of coffee, but I've got.
It's green tea sweet. It's not sweet now.
It's not sweet.
It tastes like nothing.
Green tea tastes like, it has its taste, so it's very soothing. But I think, what people don't know about me is I've got a massive sweet tooth. Like, I eat so much.
Girl, you're in a good place. Relax. Have you seen me? I am chubby for no reason. What's one piece of advice you'd offer to emerging writers?
I would say don't give up. Like, it's so stark in the beginning. You get so many rejections. At times you're writing your story and you're just thinking, where is this going? But don't give up. Like, you have to write every day.
I must say thank you, Foluso. This has been fun. I wouldn't lie.
Thank you
Congratulations again on your book. The Parlour Wife by Foluso Agbaje. She's been my guest. It's been non-stop just talking about her writing process, the inspiration behind the book, and also the titular character, the antagonist of the book, Kehinde. Make sure to go grab the book, and that's where we draw the curtains. And I must say thank you for also tuning in as well. Until I come your way next time, keep reading. Don't stop reading. I'll see you soon. My name is Judith Atibi. Bye for now.